Nadia counted 43 seconds. That was how long it took for the palace gates to close behind the carriage. She didn't look back through the window. She didn't cry. She simply sat with her hands folded in her lap and counted, because counting was the only thing she could control in that moment, and control was the only thing she had left. Her family had not come to say goodbye, or perhaps they had, and she had chosen not to check. Even now, sitting in a carriage lined with silk she had not asked for, she wasn't sure which version of the truth she preferred. Both of them hurt in the same place. The night before, her father had poured wine at dinner. Good wine. The kind he opened only when something had been decided. He had called it an alliance. He had said her name the way a man says the name of something he has already handed over. Gently. A little too gently. Like he was already trying to feel less guilty about it. Her mother had watched the table. Not Nadia. The table. Nadia had folded her napkin into a very precise square and placed it beside her plate and said nothing, because she had learned a long time ago that the words she wanted to say were not the words the room was ready to hear. She had been sold, not cruelly, not with anger, which almost made it worse. She had been sold the way people sell things they can no longer afford to keep. The palace appeared through the carriage window like something from a story someone else was living. It was enormous. Gray stone and high towers and a forest pressing close on three sides, dark even in the early morning light. The gates, those same gates she had counted, swallowed the road whole behind her. 43 seconds. She filed the number away and stepped out of the carriage when it stopped. The throne room was long and cold and full of people who had never been told no. Nadia walked the full length of it with her hands loose at her sides. She had been told to kneel when she reached the throne. She had considered this instruction during the 3-day journey and decided, politely and privately, that she would not. King Kalen was already watching her when she arrived. He was not what she had expected, though she would not have been able to say what she had expected. He was tall and broad and carried the kind of stillness that belonged to men who didn't need to fill a room with noise because the room was already theirs. He watched her walk toward him and said nothing, and the silence stretched long enough that everyone around them shifted slightly in discomfort. He didn't seem to notice the discomfort, or he noticed it and simply didn't care. When she stopped in front of the throne, he looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then he spoke. His voice was even and clear, with no performance in it. He told her the terms. She was to be his wife by law, a political arrangement, a gesture of peace toward her family's pack. She would have her own rooms, her own staff, her own reasonable freedom within the palace walls. She was not required to love him, he said. He made it sound almost administrative. Good, Nadia said. One word. She watched it arrive. Something behind his eyes, not quite surprise, not quite anything she could name, went very still. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he nodded once, and that was the end of the audience. She was taken to her rooms. The door, she noticed, locked from the outside. She noted this and decided not to think about it yet, then thought about nothing else for 3 days. 6 months passed the way cold months do, slowly and without warmth, but steadily. Kalen was fair. This was the thing she hadn't prepared herself for. She had built herself up for cruelty, had rehearsed the specific posture she would hold in the face of it. Instead, she got something harder to argue with. Policy. He did not mistreat her. He also, almost entirely, did not see her. She ate alone most mornings. She walked the palace gardens in the afternoons. She attended the formal dinners she was required to attend, and sat at the long table, and was introduced to lords and council members, who looked at her the way people look at furniture, noting she was there, not thinking much beyond that. She ran the household accounts, because no one told her not to, and someone clearly had to. She was 3 weeks into the task, when she found 2 supply contracts quietly bleeding money toward a lord who owed the king no particular loyalty. She corrected them, left the corrections on Kalen's desk without a note. The next morning, the contracts had been refiled. No acknowledgement arrived. No word. She saved this detail in the same internal cabinet where she kept the 43 seconds. She didn't know what she was building, exactly, but she kept building it. His wolf appeared on a Tuesday. She didn't know it was his wolf at first. She only knew there was a large gray shape at the edge of the tree line, visible from the window she sat beside every morning. It was there the first day, and still there the second. By the end of the first week, she had stopped pretending to read and simply watched it back. It wasn't threatening. It was something else entirely. It sat at the edge of the forest with the particular patience of something that had decided it was going to wait as long as it took, and the expression, if a wolf could be said to have an expression, was not aggression. It was closer to guilt. On the 14th morning, she threw a piece of bread at it. She was tired, and it had been sitting there for 2 weeks, and she had run out of patience for things that wouldn't say what they wanted. The bread sailed out the window, and the wolf caught it cleanly. Then it sat back down and stared at her with the specific energy of an apology that hadn't yet figured out how to become words. She stared back. "What do you want?" she said, to a wolf, through a window, alone in a palace that didn't belong to her. The wolf did not answer. She hadn't expected it to, but it also didn't leave. Why? She found the original contract on a Wednesday in March. It was in the trade archives, misfiled between 2 shipping agreements from 4 years ago. She had been cross-referencing dates on a different matter entirely when the seal caught her eye, her family's seal, pressed into paper that had no business being there. She read it standing up. Then she sat down on the stone floor, because standing felt like too much effort. The terms were worse than she knew, not by a little. Her family had not sold her into an alliance. They had sold her to settle a debt, a blood debt, the kind that Pax didn't recover from if it was called in. The king had been within his rights to take far more than one daughter. He had chosen not to. He had chosen this instead, the smallest possible solution to a problem her family had spent years creating. She was the cheapest resolution to a crisis she had not caused. She sat on the floor for a long time. The stone was very cold. She focused on the cold. It was honest, at least. It didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Then she stood up, took the contract, and walked to Kalen's study. He was there. He looked up when she entered. She placed the document on his desk and waited. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You knew," she said, not a question. "Yes," he said. She left. He didn't stop her, which was, she decided, the most truthful thing she had ever learned about him. He knew when he had no right to speak. Most people didn't know that. Most people filled the silence with themselves anyway. She went back to her rooms and sat by the window, and felt something she didn't have a clean name for. Not quite grief, not quite anger. Something that lived in the space between the two, where people go when the thing that hurt them was not simple enough to hate cleanly. That night, the wolf came inside the palace. It had never done this. There were understandings in places like this, unspoken rules about space and form, and the wolves observed them. When the night staff saw the large gray shape moving quietly through the inner corridor, they stopped and stared, and did not know what to do. The wolf did not pay attention to any of them. It walked to the hallway outside her rooms and lay down. Nadia heard nothing until midnight, when she finally gave up on sleep and opened her door. The wolf was there. Its head dropped the moment it saw her. Not in the way of submission, not like it was afraid, more like someone who had spent all day trying to figure out how to say "I am sorry," and had arrived here because this was the only honest thing left to do. She stood in the doorway in her socks and looked at it. She was angrier at the wolf than she had ever been at the man, she realized, because the wolf was the part of him that actually felt things, the part that couldn't lie to itself about what it had allowed to happen. It had taken 6 months and a misfiled document to get it outside her door. 6 months of silence and empty courtesy and contracts, refiled without a single word spoken. She didn't let it in. She didn't send it away either. She sat down on the floor on her side of the door. The wolf sat on the floor on its side of the door. They stayed like that until the sun came up, not touching, not speaking, existing in the specific and complicated space of two things that were not yet ready to forgive each other, but were no longer able to pretend there was nothing to forgive. Kalen came to her 3 days later. Not as a king, he arrived at her sitting room door at an hour that was neither morning nor afternoon, and he knocked, which he had never done before. And when she told him to come in, he entered and stood near the window, and did not perform any of the things powerful people usually perform when they know they are wrong. He told her what she already knew, Because she deserved to hear it spoken rather than discovered. Her family's debt, his decision, the logic he had used to reach it, and the way he had let that logic settle over time into something he called mercy, even when he wasn't entirely sure it had been. She asked him one question. "Did you believe it was mercy when you chose it?" she said. "Or did you decide that afterward?" He was quiet for long enough that the answer arrived without him saying it. She nodded. "I'm not forgiving you today," she said. "I know," he said. "I might," she said. "Eventually, but not while your wolf is doing the emotional work that you haven't figured out how to do yourself." Something moved in his face. Not a smile. Something earlier than a smile. Something that existed before a person learns to control their expressions. He nodded once, and she recognized the nod because she had seen it before, in the throne room, on her first day, when she said good and meant it. He left. She sat with the window open and let the morning air come in and felt, for the first time in 6 months, that she was not simply waiting for something, she was in the middle of something, which was different. She went home once. She took a carriage on a morning in late spring and arrived at the house where she had grown up and stood in the doorway of her father's study. He looked older. People always looked older when you returned to them after something that had changed you. He tried to explain himself. He used words like difficult and necessary and no good options, and she let him finish because she had not come for a debate. When he was done, she told him she wasn't there for an explanation. She had already done something, she said, in the months since she had found the contract. She had renegotiated the terms, carefully, legally, with the help of a council member she had spent 4 months quietly befriending. The debt her family owed the king had been formally cleared. The weight that had hung over their pack was gone. "Not for you," she said, when she saw the relief beginning to form on his face. "For me, so I could stop being the thing that paid it." She returned to the palace before dark. Kaelin was at the gate when the carriage arrived, not formally, not in any official capacity, just standing there in the early evening light, which was its own kind of thing, because kings who didn't care didn't stand at gates. "You came back," he said. "I live here," she said. She walked past him into the palace, and he fell into step beside her without being asked, and they walked together through the corridor in silence, which was, she decided, the most honest conversation they had ever had. The wolf was in the courtyard when she came out the next morning. She had known it would be. She brought 2 pieces of bread this time, old habit. She sat on the low stone bench near the fountain, and the wolf crossed the courtyard slowly and settled at her feet. She scratched behind its ears, because it had waited outside her door all night, and it had caught bread from a window for 14 mornings in a row, and it had lowered its head in a corridor, and that, she had decided, deserved acknowledgement. The wolf made a sound, low and soft, something between a breath and a thank you. Kaelin was standing near the archway on the far side of the courtyard, she was aware, pretending to look at something else. She pretended not to notice him pretending. The morning was quiet. The fountain moved. The wolf's breathing steadied under her hand into something that felt like peace, or at least the early shape of it, the version that exists before anyone has said anything out loud. She had been sold for 43 seconds. She had counted them, she had kept them, and carried them, and spent the year building something out of them that no one had given her permission to build. She was still building. But for the first time, she wasn't building alone, and she hadn't decided yet whether that was terrifying or the only thing she had ever actually wanted. She kept her hand on the wolf's head and let the morning happen. That was enough. For now, that was enough.